about autism, traditional autism versus the NDM type of autism, and I was saying that I do feel that I have a very traditional type of autism, Asperger's, and I would say, very autistic. But then again, what I mean by that is that it's more of a fact that I simply have autism as it was before it was reconstructed by the neurodiversity movement. And I think anyone looking at my life would tell you I'm very autistic. I mean, it's hardly something you have to look hard enough to find. Rigid routine. I'm basically by the book. I'm almost textbook. Someone could write a book about, if they wanted to write a stereotypical portrayal of someone with autism, they could write about me. Yeah, there are certain parts of my life that aren't stereotypical, but hang on, I'll just talk about it. So what I was saying is, I would say I am pretty stereotypically autistic. I follow routines by the clock, which is a very stereotypical autism symptom. A lot of these NDM people don't seem to follow routines, which I always find a bit strange. It's like, surely autistic people need routines, right? Or maybe that's just the traditional autism before it's taken over by the NDM. So I need routine. I am stereotypical in that respect. Friendship, I've never had a proper friend, okay? So I am 35 years old now, and I've never had a proper friend. The closest I came to having a friend was when I was 9 years old, and there was a girl in my class that I did befriend. That was a kind of halcyon time for me because for the first time I had this friend, but it was very up and down. I was very possessive, and I could only be friends with her when she came round to my house for tea. I couldn't share her with other kids. It was very possessive, and it didn't last, unfortunately. I couldn't really maintain friendships. I guess the bit that wasn't stereotypically, because obviously when we're talking about autism here, I should make it clear that we're referring more to the Asperger's type of autism, which I used to think I was a more able Asperger's person, but that was when I thought every single person with autism was severely disabled. Now, of course, we have these NDM people who, if you ask me, many of them don't even have Asperger's because they're so mild, it's absolutely a joke. I would say I've had to reassess that and actually think, well, if I'm Asperger's, it's actually very severe. I used not to think that because I used to think that I was one of the milder people because, like, at least I could appear normal in certain situations, where some people with Asperger's are so handicapped they can't even appear normal at all. But now, like, the NDM has completely changed that, and now I'm actually thinking, well, actually, for me, it's, what's going on here, but, so I must be pretty severe for someone with Asperger's, like, compared to people with, like, Melanie Sykes and all that, and not just Melanie Sykes, but all these other really able people you come across on YouTube and places. But then again, it might just be, the other interpretation is that actually these people aren't really autistic, and that for people like me who actually truly are autistic, we are the traditional stereotypical autistics who are basically being completely pushed out. So the whole thing has completely changed. So what I was saying was, friendship, stereotypically never really had a proper friend, always been a loner. However, when I was a kid, I did have a desire to try and make friends with other kids, and I was a lot more kind of willing to approach other people than what I am now. I think because I had less anxiety when I was a kid, and anxiety tends to develop over time. I guess in that respect I was stereotypically Asperger in a kind of active but odd sense, like Lorna Wing talked about that, how people with Asperger sometimes differ to those with more like aloof types of autism, in that they tend to be more willing to approach other people, but it's done in a very inappropriate, egotistical way. And I was very stereotypical in that. I was a stereotypical active but odd child, so I had that kind of desire to try and kind of talk to other kids, but it never really resulted in proper friendship. I had the desire to make friends, so stereotypical Asperger active but odd type presentation as a kid. I had the desire to make friends, but unfortunately it never worked out because I didn't have a social understanding. Now, as I've got older, that has changed to the point I've become a lot more aloof. I think Lorna Wing did talk about that, how people can change throughout lifetime, and often it's a case that people move from aloof to active but odd, but I suppose it can move the other way, because I've actually gone from active but odd to increasingly aloof, and I think that is more the representation of the autism shifting in response to the change in demands. And it's also quite weird how many people in the NDM seem to kind of have people in the NDM actually many of them don't seem to go through that process. Like, they seem to always be quite socially able. But what's kind of happened for me, I feel, is that because as a child it was more about kind of like running around action games and less on communication, that meant that I could get more pleasure out of that. So there's a bit more motivation, not really to relate to them properly. It was more about a kind of acquiring in a possessive way, because I saw having friendship as a kind of, I don't know, something to acquire, I guess. And also I quite liked kind of running around and action games and sort of thing like that, as kids do, running around. And then when it changed to more kind of like communication and social, my motivation went down the toilet. I became increasingly cut off as a teenager, but I was so in my own little world, it didn't make me depressed or anything. And again, this is where I differ from a lot of these people in the NDM who start talking about feeling a radical sense of difference and becoming really depressed and low self-esteem. I didn't have that. And I think, again, that just shows that I'm more traditionally autistic for them, because I was so in my own little world, it didn't bother me. And that, I think that's the difference between people like me and people like them, is that like I was really late to develop self-awareness, which again I think represents the extent of my autism, whereas many people in the NDM seem to have like acute self-awareness from a young age. I didn't have that. I was completely in my own little bubble. I literally had no self-awareness until I was in my teen years. I do now, obviously, because you do develop. Now I do have a lot of self-awareness, but it came on board late, and this hasn't resulted in me better being able to relate to people. All it's done is made me maybe appear a little bit more normal at first glance, which is a double-edged sword, because then people don't seem to notice the fact I'm autistic until they get to know me, and then they're like, yeah, she is really autistic, when they get to know how I lead my life. But it's more, but that means I'm in a difficult situation of coming across more normal than I actually am. But a lot of these NDM people, what I call these autistic light people, is that, yeah, a lot of them can appear a bit like me, but when you look at their life, they're so normal. It's like absolutely absurd. Like, how can they make normal relationships? Like, so many of them have normal relationships. Not only are they raising kids, which, okay, fair enough, yeah, like it is possible for an autistic person to have kids. I mean, it could just be like a one-off thing where, like, it might not necessarily have been as a result of a proper relationship or whatever. But if you are autistic and have kids, the likelihood is you're going to need loads of support to raise them. I certainly couldn't do it. But I'm talking about, these neurodiversity people, not only do they have kids and everything, but they do it all. A lot of them do it all without support, and they seem to have like completely normal relationships. Personally, and I know it's on PC to say this, I do feel a lot of them are actually more ADHD or have some other neurological condition, because there are loads of other neurological conditions, and I do sense that some of them actually do have a neurological condition, but I do feel that for some of them it's more in the way of ADHD and stuff like that. But autism is now so different to how it was traditionally that, yeah, legitimately, if they've been diagnosed autistic, then they are autistic, at least by today's standards. We can't say they're not, because they've been once you've been diagnosed, obviously self-diagnosis is completely different, but once you have been diagnosed autistic, are legitimately autistic. We can't say they're not because they've been diagnosed autistic. But the question then you have to ask is this the autism that was traditionally talked about in the past, or is this some new condition? And if it's a new condition, then they need to make that clear in the diagnostic manuals, because it's certainly not the autism I read about back in the day. I can tell you that much. It's not the type of autism where you don't have any friends, where you literally have no clue how to relate to people. It's not the type of autism where you follow rigid routines 24/7, where you're completely in your own little world and cut off from others, where you have this egotistical need to put yourself and your own interests ahead of everything else, because a lot of these people actually seem to be very socially motivated. It's not the type of autism I have. So let me know what you think. Thank you for watching.